Hey everyone, Keith Farron here. My friend and fellow author Sarah Beckman just released her new book, Hope in the Hard Places: How to Survive When Your World Feels Out of Control. Sarah writes eloquently and passionately and practically about what to do when your life is kind of falling apart a bit, when you're dealing with something really hard like cancer or the death of a loved one or a divorce. When we have those kind of life shifting, life changing moments, how do we process that? How do we handle it? Sarah has gone through her share of it and writes from the perspective of somebody who both knows what it is to walk that journey, as well as what it is to walk that journey before faith in Jesus and with faith in Jesus. So it is a fantastic book. I had a chance to read it before it came out. And last week I had a chance to sit down with Sarah Beckman, and you get to see that interview right now. Well, hey there. I am here with my friend and author, Sarah Beckman from Albuquerque. How you doing, Sarah?
I'm so good, Keith. How are you?
Good. We've known each other long enough. I can tease you about the name.
Yeah.
We actually known each other for 10 years. We were just figuring that out before we hit record, and got a chance to interview you about your first book. Today, we're going to talk about your second book, which I'm excited about. I feel like it's kind of the flip side of a massively important coin. And so tell us a little bit about that first book and the second book, and that kind of how they're two sides of that coin.
Yes. Well, the first book was called Alongside, and we did talk about it 2 years ago in February when it came out. And it is written for those of us that want to know how to love our friends and family well in the middle of hard things like cancer, illness, divorce, loss, any kind of trial. And it's very practical in nature. And we talked kind of through the practicalities of people say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. But what happened was after that book came out, people were coming to me and saying, oh, by the way, what about me? I'm the one in the trial and I need practical solutions and strategies for how to get through it.
Yeah.
And I heard it enough that, I ventured down that road. But interestingly, the first thing is that the book was going to be about how to ask for and receive help, because that was such a common piece of feedback that I heard from people. Mm-hmm. And my friend won't, or I don't want to receive help, all those things. And I went to the publisher with that idea, and they said, if you don't want to receive help, would you go to the bookstore and buy a book about how to receive help?
Yeah.
No,
right.
I probably would not. So then I really did some soul searching and went back to people and did a survey and asked people, what are you looking for in the middle of your hard place? And repeatedly they said, I want hope. I want encouragement. I want practical ways to get through it. And so I kind of took that as, okay, asking for help and receiving help is something I need to encourage and equip people to do in the book, but it's just one part of the whole big picture. And so it's practically and biblically how we can find hope in the middle of our hard stuff.
Yeah. And I wonder, even just hearing you talk about both of them together, because I've obviously talked to with you at the process of writing each of them, but
yes.
It's probably the first time I've heard you talk for 1 minute about both of them together.
Yeah.
I really wonder if people read that first book as they think, oh, I need to help my neighbor. And then if they grab the second book, I wonder if that is going to give them the encouragement and the confidence to ask for help when they need it as well. Yeah. That kind of what you set out to do with your second book, I think may end up being accomplished by both books together. People like to hear from people who can give practical advice from the journey, not just people who have fantastic theories.
Yes.
So I know that you have both. That first book, you had walked with a neighbor through kind of really hard times, but this one being about how to find hope in the hard places. Tell us a little bit about your own journey, what you're kind of comfortable sharing.
Yes. Well, the impetus for the first book, Alongside, was because I had been on bed rest with my third child, and then in a period of 6 years, I had 4 back surgeries. And then simultaneously, I walked through cancer with a neighbor, then a best friend, and then a brother-in-law. and all of them were terminal. And that was what I kind of called my decade of hardship. And that spurred on this need to create a resource for people so that we could be better at loving in these hard situations. But then you get through it and you kind of feel like, I didn't really go through that much. I mean, and compared to other people and all the things, but because of that, people asking me for that resource of how do I get through my hard place, when I really dug in, I used my personal experience. And, I've struggled with an emotional affair in my marriage, and getting through that was really a hard place for me. When my first book was coming out, I was a victim of like anonymous harassment on my cell phone. And it was like of graphic sexual nature, and it was ongoing for 2 months, and, authorities and pictures of texts and documentation. And it wasn't like, we never figured out who the person was. It was random. And I eventually had to change my phone number. But, then just like my daughter struggled with anxiety in grade school and into high school, and them still walking with friends through hard things. So there's been a lot that I've faced. But I really just always felt like I want to encourage people that there's a way that we can go through it without letting it take us under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one unique perspective that you bring to the table is you weren't somebody who just, have always your entire life walked this committed life of faith. And so you talk about the difference between navigating these trials prior to faith in Jesus and now navigate them with Jesus, how now you have even used the phrase that I can't separate faith and hardship now. And so unpack that a little bit for us.
Yes. In those early years, I remember when we lost my brother. He was 44 and he died suddenly of a heart attack. And he was 17 years older than me. So whatever, that put me in my early, 20s or late 20s. My son was 1 year old, and I was not yet like walking with the Lord the way I was later and am today. And I remember just being devastated, like driving back and forth to the city where every day just sobbing, and not feeling any hope. And not feeling any sense of there's a better lining to this, or it was just so crushing. And that doesn't change when we lose people. I mean, it was equally crushing when my best friend died 10 years ago now. But it was different because I had this eternal perspective, and I recognized that we never lose. In the end, we may lose someone on this earth, but we do not lose in the end, because Jesus is the overcomer. And it shifted everything about my perspective. And now like people, alongside it's very practical, and it's not like quite as chock full of Bible verses and those things, but there was just no way that I could have gotten through the, harassment situation. I clung to the verse, no weapons formed against you shall prosper. I had to say it every single day, hundreds of times a day sometimes, to just keep moving on and doing the work that I had to do. So but I wasn't doing that with my brother. I wasn't clinging to the fact that he was with Jesus, and it just was so different. And so I can't separate it. I would never be able to stay upright in the middle of hardship without my faith.
And I want to dive into some of that, the Bible perspective, because I mean, that's kind of why I wanted you to share about this book on this blog, is because this blog's all about Bible. And so right. I want to dive deeper into that. But first, let's kind of go up 40,000 feet and give us the overview of what people will find in this book. I know you've divided into 4 sections. Give us the high level pass on that.
Yeah, so the beginning I titled Terrain, and there's 5 chapters, and there's sort of big picture faith, in the sense of it's not just about the day-to-day, how do we get through it, but it's sort of like, what is the context that we're facing spiritually? So we talk about, there's a chapter called Detour, which is one of the hardest chapters I wrote, but it's also really important. It's sort of the why, and my best take at interviewing and researching and, answering for people who are wondering, why me, why my child, why my husband, why my friend. And then there's a chapter called Seen, and that is this notion of, wow, God sees us even in the middle of our pain. And I have had so much feedback from early readers that is just changed things for them, just knowing that they're seen. There's a chapter called Entrusted, which is about what if our trial is really to be multiplied because God's entrusted it to us. And that was also very hard to write because I wanted to give that assignment right back to God. Who am I to tell people to multiply their hardship? That's not fair or nice, but he does ask us to do that. So it's the lay of the land. Then the next 5 chapters are called Preparation. And that's sort of just practical. Who do we take with us? What do we bring along? Like all of this sort of getting ready before you travel, you would get your things packed and ready. And so it's kind of that pre-travel. And then the third section is called Journey. And those are tangible ways that we walk through the crisis, looking for the green, which is gratitude, and seeking the source, which is just different ways that we can connect to God, gathering our daily bread, removing the boulders, which is just sort of that notion of what gets in our way, what's going to block our path from getting through this. And it's like unmet expectations and unforgiveness and hard things. And then the last section is called Destination. And it's the chapter is called Hard But Holy. And again, hard to write and sort of just, I'll leave it to the readers to get to that point in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's it. Those 4 sections, just really distinct, but meant to be sequential, right? As if you were going on a journey. That's sort of the metaphor, the travel journey that is the metaphor.
Yeah, and it's definitely a journey. And we'll touch base probably at the end of this interview about that last chapter, because as you know, that was definitely, I know it was hard for you to write, but I'm glad you wrote it because it was probably my favorite. So so look at there's a part in there, as you mentioned, on the packing list, and you've got a lot in there on Bible. And so taking that, when you look at that packing list and you talk about having a focal point, you talk about a mindset, unpack that idea and how the Bible plays into that important piece of the puzzle.
Right. Well, as I was in that situation where I was on bed rest with my daughter, that was sort of that first significant trial that I remember as an adult where I started to come to faith. And I had bought one of those, like a plaque that was needle pointed, and it said, "Be still and know I'm God." And it was black, rectangular, and it never got put on the wall. It was on the floor in the corner of the bedroom the whole time I was on bed rest, 11 weeks. And then even into my first back surgery, which is when my daughter was 18 months old, the dang thing sat on the ground. But I would look at it all the time, and I would think to myself, yes, I am being still and knowing that he is God. And eventually the plaque got hung in the wall and it got transferred to a friend, and it's sort of become a thing where I have encouraged people, like, when you have a baby, they tell you to bring a focal point to the hospital. And so when you're in a crisis, I just think it's super important that we have our eyes fixed on something that's truthful, that's meaningful, that will spur us on, that will encourage us to just keep focused on the right things instead of the circumstance, because it's so easy to slip into everything is terrible and nothing's going my way and this is hard and I'm not going to make it. But so focal point can be like a hashtag. A good friend of ours, their daughter was having a baby and they didn't think the baby would even live through birth. And they had a hashtag, Big God, Little Warrior. And they put it on everything, every social media post, every Caring Bridge post, every, message and picture. And his name is Joshua and he's 11 months old. And it hasn't been easy, but he is a warrior. And that hashtag they've clung to, it's just been a way for them to set their minds. So just that notion of a Bible verse, a truth, a hashtag, a phrase, a word, that's really helpful. And then in a bigger sense, our mindset, how are we going to navigate it? And for me, I remember when I couldn't get out of bed to shower, I was allowed to shower every other day for the bed rest journey. And I told myself, okay, I'm going to take a bath instead of a shower because I have 2 kids and pretty soon I'm going to have 3 and I will want a bath really bad. And so I just sat in that tub just thinking to myself, you know what? I am soaking up the relaxation. That's what I'm doing. And so it was just, my mindset was not, this is terrible. I can't shower. It was, I get to have a bath. So, that's kind of a simple example, but there's so many ways that we can shift our mindset that help us prepare, but we have to be thoughtful about doing it. That's really the point, is that what are you going to pack for the journey? You have to put some essential things, these essentials have to go in your bag.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm reminded, one of the things that I've talked so much about and preached on in the last, I don't know, couple of years is God's just bringing to my mind this idea of what it means to love God with our mind. Because we talk about loving him with our heart and kind of giving him our passions, and loving him with our soul, and giving our eternal salvation to him, and loving him with our strengths and all that. And we don't talk a lot in the church about loving him with our mind.
I love that.
Other than the just piece of, that's why you need to read your Bible. But we don't talk about kind of how to love God with our mind, and this idea of having a focal point and having that foundation and focusing on things that are eternal. And I think that's all part of this powerful lump of 6 pounds or whatever it is that God's put in our skull that we just don't do a lot. And
transform ourselves by renewing our mind, right? Don't conform to the patterns of this world. And we have to actually be partaking in that transformation of our mind.
When I started seeing how many times in the Old Testament and in the writing of Jesus and the writing of Peter and the writing of Paul, it talks of loving God with our mind, and Peter writes of being sober-minded, and this idea of what we put in our mind is truly transformational, and yet we don't talk about it a lot. Right. And so I love it that in Hope in the Hard Places you've anchored yourself on that for sure. So as we're wrapping up a bit, before I ask that last question, I do want to look, when you talk in those few middle chapters on kind of anchoring on biblical truth, how has the Bible helped you, or how have some of your readers told you it's helped them specifically navigate those trials?
Yeah.
And for you saw that, for one, it was that focal point of be still and know that I am God. What are some other ways that the Bible has helped you navigate that?
Yes. Well, interestingly, I do have a really specific example. I got an early copy of the book, of course, in a few months ago. And I was walking with a friend from church, and she wasn't really a friend when I first met her, but she was part of, she came forward for prayer at the church, but she was struggling with suicidal thoughts. And I do have permission to share her story. And so we had to follow up on that, because that, prayers are confidential, but we had to follow up on that. And in the end, we sat with her, and I ended up following her to the hospital and checking her in for the behavioral watch. And she informed me that she'd been through it before many, many times. And so there I'm sitting, and I know that they're about to take her to the room that I can't go any further than the double doors. And she's telling me they're going to strap me down. They're going to take my phone, my medicine, my purse, my Bible, all of it. And I'm going to be alone. And I said, okay, Nancy, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick a verse, any verse that you want, or I'll help you, something short that you can remember, and you're going to have that. And you don't need anything else if you have that. And so we decided on Be Still, I Know I'm God, because it's short and easy and most people can remember it. And she texted me the next morning and said, everything went as I expected, except I repeated Be Still and Know I'm God all night. And I fell asleep, and I've never fallen asleep. And the woman said that I was not seeming like I was at risk. So she actually unstrapped me, which has never happened before. And she said, I've never gone through a night like that with such peace. And that having that verse really helped. Well, fast forward, it doesn't just get easy and perfect and better right away. And she's been up and down, up and down, up and down. And she was back in the hospital around Christmas, and I had just gotten my books, and busy day. Should I go? I have so much going on, just those human struggles. But I wrote alongside, and I know that I should go, but I don't want to go because it's Christmas. And I'm just being straight with you. Like, it's not always easy to pick up and go to a hard place with someone. So I went to the hospital, brought the book, and thought, if I wrote this book, this is why I wrote it, for the one person, right? So I was there 2 hours. I gave her the book. I left. She went home. And a couple, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, she sent me a text. And she said, I have to be honest. When you handed me that book, I was really mad because I have heard don't give up hope and keep hoping and hope, hope, hope. And I feel like there is no hope for me. I explode when people tell me to have hope because they don't know my PTSD and my SI and all my physical ailments. And I was like, I don't. But she said, it helped me to read and know that there was ways that I could cling. So there's a chapter called Gather Your Daily Bread. There's a chapter called Seek the Source. So she told me she saved a chapter per day for 2 weeks and it got her through, and that she picked like a focal point, which is I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. She picked a mindset, which is I'm going God's way. And then she read and clung to she said, I looked up every Bible reference in the whole book and every scripture that you listed as ways for me to like keep reminding myself of who I am and who God is. And those are all in those chapters. There's just like lists of yeah.
That was not a quick exercise for her.
Yes. And she looked up every single one in the book, and it literally helped her navigate her hard place. And I went to church a week ago and she was serving, and I walked by and she's standing there holding a sign and it said, it's a new day. And it was just coincidence that they gave her this sign for some purpose. And I just started to cry. It's like, it is a new day. Look at you, right? Like, here you are. It's a new day. And it's not me. It's the truth of God's word that like came alive for her because it's in a book. I didn't write the scriptures. I just put them in the book. Right. And they saved her, Keith. I mean, it is. God's word is alive and active, and it gives hope and brings healing and truth, and we can't underestimate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things I told you when you first sent me the copy to read, that I loved how it wasn't just based on foundational biblical principles, but it was filled with biblical truth and references, and people could find not just, go find a good Bible verse, but here are a bunch. you know,
choose one of these if you're in a hard place.
Truth to believe, but here are some things to look up. And the fact that it equips somebody to go into the word deeper,
yes,
I think is fantastic. So while that seems like a fantastic place to end, I'm not going to end, because I've got my favorite line in the book comes in that last chapter, where I'm going to let you unpack it rather than me just saying it, but you talk about the difference between fear and faith. And I loved the way you worded it. So I'll let you do the great reveal.
Oh, well, this chapter, Hard But Holy, is kind of about, and there's situations where we know that it's not going to end in our lifetime where someone's going to be, with us, or the situation doesn't always end up like Nancy, right?
Right.
It might end up, in fact, she's still really struggling, and she might lose her job, and all sorts of other things are still going on. Her life didn't just magically get better. And we know that as believers, like, we can have faith, but it doesn't always just make everything rosy.
Right.
And so this notion of being afraid means that we're not trusting in God. And so this whole notion of fear wonders, what if this worst case scenario happens to me? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my child? What if I, fall prey again to this addiction that I'm struggling with, right? But when we have faith, it proclaims, even if the worst thing happens, I will still be okay. And so that's the difference between faith and fear. Faith is about even if, where that whole fear is like, what if? But yeah, we can just trust in God that even if the worst thing happens, we're still going to be okay. Even though I lost my best friend, a neighbor, my brother-in-law, like, there is a bigger picture than that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I remember reading that, and it just kind of, that phrase, fear asks what if, and faith
Yes.
asks or says even if. And
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I remember highlighting it, putting a star by it,
You
emailing
emailed
you
it to
about it.
me.
And I
Yeah, you're
think
like, I love
that
this.
idea, it's just every once in a while, there's just something simple that just
Right. Well, and people,
summarizes such an important distinction.
I don't ever want people to think that faith is dependent on everything going well. It
No,
isn't.
no.
That's the whole point of it, right? We
Yeah.
still can have faith even if the worst situation
Yeah.
happens.
And then Mercy Me goes and writes a song about it for you.
Right. My husband and I want to get tattoos that say even if.
Right. Good. Good. Do it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. This has been awesome. Can't wait for if depending on when you're seeing this video, the book comes out on Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. Going to be available everywhere in both print and digital formats. Get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBook, wherever you like to buy books. But just grab a copy, because as they say, we're either coming out of a trial, we're in a trial, or we're going to hit a trial. So,
Yes, sadly.
and this is a fantastic book. So thanks for taking the time, Sarah.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.